guys, so today we are starting our first part of the Oiran build series for Komurasaki. If you have not seen my first video breaking down what an Oiran is and what her outfit's all about, go check that video out. I'll link it up in the little eye cards. We're going to be starting off with the Hara Juban and Naga Juban layers, which is going to be the first two, the one closest to the skin and then the one worn over that. I'll be playing a little bit more fast and loose with my patterns than I will on some of the outer ones, since these layers will barely be visible and are more about the effect and the bulk of it than the actual look of the garments. The innermost layer is going to be made out of just a plain weave beige cotton, since that is going to be getting the sweatiest out of all of the layers and I want something that's going to be easy to wash. And then on top of that is going to be a red cotton sateen. This will be a two-part garment with a top and a bottom. I believe, could be wrong about this, I'll try and check myself before I edit this, that is, when it's broken up into two pieces, is a Hara Juban and a Susuyoke. But again, I do not speak Japanese, so if I butcher any of this, I do apologize in advance. If you're interested to know how to make your own kimono, I highly recommend you go check out Billy Matsunaga's videos, both her one on getting kimono measurements and her one on actually making kimono. The one on kimono measurements is going to elucidate a lot of things that kind of get glossed over in the making of. So those two videos are exactly how I made basically all of my kimono. I started with that. So if you want that pattern, go there. I will not be getting into the pattern drafting part of this, more the construction and the layers themselves. So without any further ado, let's get into it. To start with, I'm taking some very basic measurements for the skirt part of my undergarments. I'm doing this by just wrapping a piece of fabric around my waist and seeing if it is long enough to fit me. Since most of this garment is just straight lines, you can actually rip the fabric along those lines and it should tear pretty cleanly. I did this for all of my skirt panels and my straps. Hi, so I forgot to get the, let me get down here. I forgot to record the way I patterned out the top for my Naga Juban layer. I think is the right word for it. You'll see in the video. Anyways, I forgot to do that. So I'm going to show you real quick, just walking through the steps of how I patterned it. It's super easy. So for these tops, they need two things. They need to be cross front, kind of like a wrap dress is, and they need to have a low back for where the kimono is pulled down. So I started with a t-shirt. I traced out just the general shape of the t-shirt, going all the way around. I don't do separate sleeves for this. It doesn't matter if they fit super great. So for this, and the way I've seen a lot of people do them online, so they have sleeves that are kind of just like similar to like a batwing sleeve, so they kind of just curve. So I trace all of the sides out and then I curve these, so instead of it having a direct pit, it's just a gentle curve here. And then for the front, I have a wrap dress, so I use that as my basis, but if you don't, you can kind of just eyeball it. If you don't, I recommend making a mock-up just in case. But the way I do it is that I have this very pretty wrap dress. So what I did was figured out where the shoulder seam on this is and laid it out matching up with the t-shirt, and then traced the angle at which it closes and overlaps itself. I only did this once because I did 2 sides on the front, so all you need is one pattern piece that's half of this, and then you can flip it over and make the same thing on the other side. And that's how you get the shape of the front. On the back, it's the exact same base shape, but instead of being 2 parts with the covering, you just leave it as the full shape and take a big U dip in the back. Frankly, I could have made mine bigger, so don't be afraid to make this really low, just to be safe. And then, once I had my pieces, I sewed them up on the sides, around the shoulders, leaving the arm seams open for obvious reasons. And then I sewed 2 pieces of ribbon on the fronts so that I could wrap them around each other and tie them off, which you'll see when I put it on. But that's the gist of this. I know it's a little confusing, but the truth of it is that this is a layer no one's gonna see. Your best bet is to make a wrap top of some kind with a low back. Beyond that, live your best life, you know? So, that's it. Next, I'm starting on the main kimono pieces for the rest of the garments. This is a mock-up made out of basic cotton, sewn together very simply, based off of Billy Matsunaga's patterns, which I've mentioned in this video. Hopefully later I'll be able to repurpose this and show you a video of how I do that, but otherwise it was just put together very simply. So I have almost finished with my mock-up kimono, so I know most of my measurements at this point. I've only got a couple left, so I'm going ahead and marking those out here with what I know. So I did my basic kimono, and then on Billy Matsunaga's video where she talks about kimono sizing, which if you're going to use her tutorial, I highly recommend you watch that video as well. She makes a couple of adjustments for underlayers in terms of sizing, so I've gone ahead and done that. It's generally stuff like adjusting the sleeves to be slightly smaller so they sit cleanly inside, and adjusting the length. So since I've got multiple layers, they go incrementally. My final sleeve width will be approximately 56 centimeters, so I've got one that's at 55.5 and then another one at 55. Billy Matsunaga actually only recommends doing 0.8 total, but I'm not sticking super closely with those measurements just because the circumstances of all of this are a little funky. I'm also doing half-width collar for the under layers to make it easier, and then I'm going to be trying to do a full-width collar for the outside hikizuri kimono, which involves a slightly different process, but I think it'll be okay. I could probably figure it out. But basically the only things I'm waiting on now are to attach the collar, which I needed to ask Billy Matsunaga a question about that because I got lost in the directions and figure out how much to shorten that. Because hikizuri kimonos aren't folded over, so the collar has to be much higher in order to not poke out from underneath the obi. And then the links are going to need to be adjusted as well, since a lot of the layers are trailing the ground. The underlayers of the susuyoke and the, I'm calling it the donuki, the white layer, those are both going to be longer than traditional Juban layers would be, since they trail the ground in the illustration. But I do know for a fact that hikizuri kimonos are supposed to be, it's when you're calculating it, it's your height plus 20 centimeters. And then if you're doing it all as one piece, it's your height times 2 plus 20 times 2. And I got that infographic, I believe, from Billy Matsunaga, and I'll put that on screen if I have it around to show you guys. But yeah, so there's basically just a lot of adjustments to measurements, and we're gonna keep going, I guess. I am kind of mathed out, if I'm being perfectly honest. I'm tired. For the collar, I found that it was much easier to ease the collar on a dress form rather than trying to do it flat. However, if you don't have a dress form, you can still do this flat. It won't change things that much. This was just a tool I had at my disposal, so I put it to use. And then it was time to try it on and make sure everything fit. The big points to look for here was how the collar was sitting on the undergarment, where the sleeves were hitting, and with the length of the garment. Once I'd confirmed that everything was sitting about right, I started on the first layer of the undergarments. This nifty little sleeve contraption is meant to help guide the lines for where you trace your sleeves out to make sure that they're the right size. I used the largest width of 3 centimeters. This is off of Billy Matsunaga's website, and I highly recommend backing it with a cardboard like you see in the video to make it a little bit stiffer. I've used this for basically all of my kimonos since, and it's been incredibly useful. Since it's difficult to fully turn and fell the inner part of sleeves, I just pinked them instead to make it a little bit easier, and then turned them over where I could and just whipped them when it was impossible to do otherwise. Almost all of the seams on these garments are hand felled or hand whip stitched down, just because I find it to be a very soothing and a little bit cleaner of a process.
So I just realized I sewed the collar on the wrong direction. The collar's done in 2 parts, a shorter one and a longer one that are overlaid on top of each other, and I sewed them together and then sewed the collar on so that the 2 parts were facing towards the inside rather than the outside, meaning that you can't see it. All you can see is the stitch lines from where I sewed it on. But I'm gonna just keep going, because structurally it's the same, and this will be getting covered by a Han Eddy anyways, so I can put my collar stiffener in it, so you won't even be able to see the collar in the first place. It's just... pay attention when you're sewing, kids. Don't be like me. Okay, I'm gonna go hand sew this, I guess. Bye.
For the bottom half of this garment, I ended up pleating it a bit to try and get it to pull back at the edges. Honestly, in the future, I probably wouldn't do this again. It's a bit of an unnecessary step, but I did find that it helped it sit a little bit flatter and a little bit neater, since this was not as measured of a garment as some of the outer layers were. I ended up hand stitching down the pleats to get them to sit a little bit flatter. You might not find this necessary. And then the final steps were overlocking the bottom hem and then turning it up and sewing it down. I ended up doing this because the bottom of the skirt was not quite as long as I had hoped it was going to be, and rather than try and take more of that length off, I wanted to preserve it as much as possible. And then it was time to try it on. Starting with the undermost layers, wrapping everything around myself, trying to get it very tight and very clean. The skirt is basically just a very large rectangle that I've wrapped around myself and added ties to. Very simple. I also took the chance to sew on a little extra piece for this undergarment. You thread your waist strap through it and it'll help it keep down in the back. I will add what the name of that is on screen here because I cannot remember at the moment. The elastic part that I'm using to secure it is called a korin belt. It is an elastic with little clips on either end that you can hook onto the garment. I find this to be one of the most invaluable things you can have for kimono wearing. I don't know about anyone else, but oftentimes my front will just want to shift open more and more and more, and this is one of the only ways I've found to truly keep it where it's supposed to be. I've also added a collar stiffener here just to get the full effect of the garment and what it looks like on. And then it is time for the skirt. I add the skirts over the tops as an extra layer of security to help keep them in place, as I find my front top area wants to drift more than anything else. And that's it. I feel like I look a little bit like a shrine maiden with just all of this red, like I'm wearing hakama pants, but I'm very pleased with it, and I'll see you guys next time.